Good evening, everybody. My name is Sue. I'm a program assistant here at the Elmhurst Public Library. And this is a hybrid program this evening. So we have some people in person and some people watching online. And I am going to share a poll right now that's just asking how many people are watching on your screens at home. If you wouldn't mind filling those polls out. Ooh. Sorry. Oh, backwards. Sorry. So if you are watching from home, this is a webinar, and that means you can see and hear us, but we can't see and hear you. So we'll do a question and answer segment at the end this evening. If you're watching on Zoom, you can submit your questions at any time in the Q&A feature or the chat. And those of us in person, we can also do that at the end of the program, but you don't have to type them in. Just remember them. If you are watching on Zoom, we have enabled the live transcript option. If you would like to disable that, you're going to look for the closed captioning button on the bottom of your screen or in the Zoom menu. If you do not see the button with CC, click on More with the 3 dots and then select Hide Subtitles. In the library, we also have an assisted listening system. If you'd like to borrow one of the devices, please come see the staff at the back of the room. And all you have to do is just simply press the power button and then adjust using volume. Additionally, we would like to remind everybody that when we're in the library, we're wearing a mask at all times. And please silence your cell phones or any other devices. Bathrooms are located down the hallway near the parking lot entrance. And if you need to leave the room at any time during the presentation, you may please feel free to do so. Just catch the door on your way out so it doesn't slam. And now I'm going to turn it over to Julia. Thank you so much.
I appreciate that. So I'm from the Chicago Botanic Garden. My name is Julia Zoltowski, and I am so pleased to be here out in Elmhurst. It's my first time out here, and it's beautiful. I love it. So definitely going to make a trip back out here again. A little bit about myself. I've been in the field for about 15 years. I've been working at the Chicago Botanic Garden for the last 3.5 years. And during that time, I've had many different hats. One of my recent roles was a horticulturalist, where I tended to Spider Island in the model railroad. And recently, about 5 months ago, I transitioned into a new position at the garden, where now I work for their Windy City Harvest Department, which is their urban agriculture department in the city of Chicago. We service the South and West Side Chicago Housing Authority residents and multiple other partners and community members. And there I facilitate therapeutic horticulture workshops and programming. So I work with seniors and children of all ages doing gardening for life enrichment programming, basically. So it's a passion of mine to teach a variety of subjects, all in the name of taking care of ourselves, taking care of the planet, and taking care of each other. So that's kind of the lens I'm going to come here with. So bear with me. And part of that lens also is a lot about like DIY and frugalness. So I do have resources for you to look at and materials that I can suggest, but ultimately, I think it's about finding what you've got already. So I like to just know why people are here. If you're watching through the webinar, you can type into the chat as well. Just sort of what brought you to this class, what brought you to this topic, what were you interested in? You can raise your hand in the crowd, and on the chat, you can just type into the chat if you'd like. And if you're nervous, that's okay too. It just helps me figure out what we can delve deeply into and what we can reel back in if you already know some things.
I like growing herbs in the summer, and I do it successfully during the summer, and then I bring them into my house.
Yeah.
I just want to find out how to do a better job of that, maybe. So I'm not finding them during the rest of the year. I should.
Awesome. Well, and you came to the right place. I didn't see anything popping up in the chat, so we'll just go ahead and move on through. So the overview for today, we're going to talk a little bit about where you're going to start assessing your space, your materials, what you've got, and then we'll delve a little bit more deeply into specifics, what kind of there's a.
We did have somebody in
Oh,
chat,
yeah, let's
sorry.
hear 'em. It's no problem.
I have a vegetable garden and enjoy it very much. I'm wondering about indoor greens. Here to learn how to grow kale indoors this winter.
Cool.
And let me see here. I think there was one more. Hold on one second. I live in an apartment and want to learn more about keeping growing plants indoors. And I would like to learn how to bring some of my outdoor garden indoors, especially raised herbs.
Yeah, awesome. Well, then you all are in the right place, especially because, you know, I live in the city and I came from Denver where I lived in a nice open space and I could grow in my backyard a lot. And then I had to adapt to living here. And that required a lot of changes in how I saw my space. So with that in mind, we'll talk about our spaces and how to be realistic about our space, because I think that's one of the first things. And then we'll go into the materials and get a little bit more specific. And then we'll talk about plant suggestions. What are the best things to grow indoors? What are the most successful? What are the easiest? And then we'll get into our tips and tricks for success, those troubleshooting moments that we're all scratching our head about sometimes. So. Okay. So growing greens indoors doesn't have to be complicated. When you are starting out, you want to think about what do you want to grow. So some folks want to grow indoor herbs. They want to bring their kale inside. So you want to consider not only what do you want to grow, but what are you going to use the most often? No problem. And from there, once you've figured out what you're going to grow and what you're going to use most often, then you're going to consider your spaces. Where are your natural light sources? You know, where are your south, your west, your east facing windows? Do you have open space on your windowsills, or do you need to create a little corner in your house? What does your kitchen offer you? I think that kitchens are the best to have your little indoor growing area, because you're going to be prompted to use your herbs more regularly. And the more you use your herbs, the more they're going to grow. And the more they grow, the more that you can use them. And not only that, you know, not just herbs, but microgreens, lettuces, kale, things like that. When they're in the kitchen, they're not out of sight, out of mind. They're right there. And then if you don't have the optimal indoor natural lighting, consider what your non-natural light sources are. I really like to utilize mirrors. I think mirrors are a really great way to reflect ambient light. So I have a north-facing window. I put a mirror on the opposite side of that north-facing window, even though the north-facing window doesn't get any light really. With that mirror, it brightens up the space. So those are some ways to kind of use what you've got, and you can get a little aesthetic with it, create a cute little decoration design if you're into interior decorating. But then even further, sometimes that's not enough. You might need to invest in some lights. And I think that that's the next step. If you don't have your natural light sources and you're struggling to grow inside, the next step is probably going to be to purchasing lights. And they don't need to be crazy grow lights. You can just get a little lamp, little fluorescent light bulb. But there are other options that we'll get into in a little bit as well. But you might need to go that route. And a lot of people don't want to, because again, feng shui, maybe it gets in the way of their aesthetic, but if you want to successfully grow herbs, there's going to have to be some sacrifices. And there are ways to seamlessly integrate these alternative light sources into your home. So we'll talk about that as well. And then I think the big one for me is always, do I have enough time and energy? A lot of times I get really excited about a project and an endeavor, and I go really into it, and I end up burning out or not having enough time because I work a 40-hour job and then I do teaching on the side and, you know, have a life, whatever. So just consider like what you're going to invest into and how often you're going to be able to actually tend to that, because that's going to also determine what you grow, how often you grow it, and how often you're going to be needing to maintain it. And then finally, in your handouts and in the online resource that you'll get at the end of the program, you'll see a list of materials. You might have some of these materials already in your home, and that we'll talk about some other substitutions and things around your house that you might be able to reuse as you are looking to create your gardens. So this is just an example of some of the ways that you can grow greens indoors. So on the right there, we've got microgreens. You got some like lemongrass and a little bit of radish, I think that is. And then on the, well, my right, you've got, these are food scraps. And that's another really amazing way to bring greens indoors. Maybe you harvest your vegetables outside and you have these scraps and you don't want to make a stock and you don't want to compost because you don't do those things. You can put them in a pot, put them in a cup of water, and a lot of them will grow. And we can get a little bit into that, but that's kind of more on the other end of the spectrum. We're going to focus more on like the microgreens and your lettuces and kales and things like that. But this is just another example of how you can really utilize what you have around. And all of these things, every part of this that you're growing here is edible. You have like beets and garlic and lettuce, celery you can even do. So. And I already mentioned the kitchen herb garden. I think that that's a great place to do it. It's also really ideal because it has about a 75-degree temperature on average. That's what a lot of plants want. So you don't want it to be in a really, really hot room or a really, really cold room or near a draft. You want it to kind of have that optimum temperature of about 75 degrees. But if the kitchen's a no-go, just where are some other areas that you might be able to easily access water and electricity, because you might need those things as you're growing your plants. You maybe not want to be dragging water from the bathroom into the other room and dripping it everywhere or whatever. If you're like me, you've got 100 plants in your house, so you're dripping water everywhere anyways. But on the other end of that, south-facing windows are going to be your best bet. However, not all south-facing windows are the greatest. They might be blocked by a building or a tree or something. So if that's the case, then west and east are really good. The key is bright, indirect light. They don't want scorching, intense light. Even the fluorescents, they kind of have to be at a certain height. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But the key is bright, indirect light. So any window can do, with supplemental lighting as well. South are the best though. So with lights, you know, we talked a little bit about your natural light sources, and then you also have your non-natural light sources. And you'll see setups, and I'll show some photos here in a second. You'll see setups where they have like these big bright lights and they're huge and cumbersome. And you don't need to do that in order to grow. There are light bulbs that are like $30. They clip on and they're really quiet, not so bright for you, and they work really well. And I have some examples here in a little bit. You just want to make sure that if you're going to go the LED route, that it's a full spectrum, but even fluorescent light bulbs will be fine. The purple and blue ones work well, and I have some examples of those. Yes, I have those. I have a slide of those pictures. Exactly. And so then with containers, anything can be a container. Anything can be what your growing medium, but you want to make sure it has drainage holes in it. That's the most important part of this. So you can use egg cartons, you can use berry containers, but you want to make sure there's just like a couple of little holes at the bottom so that it's not soaking wet. Because if these plants are sitting in sopping wet soil, you're probably going to get what's called dampening off. That's when like it looks like somebody pinched the bottom of the plant and then it just flops right over. Alternatively, if you don't have good lighting sources, you know, you might see that your plants are growing really tall and high and scraggly. So you need to play with your height, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but light and containers are really important. And then furthermore, your soil and fertilizer. These are the three most important things when you're first starting out, creating your foundation for your plants. Because if you're using like garden soil or certain potting mixes that are not made for seed starting, you can end up lowering your germination rate and struggling to see good healthy plants showing up because they have to struggle a lot more. Seed starting mix is a lighter mix. It usually has more perlite in it, more vermiculite, more things that are going to help the drainage. And because of that, some of the other ones are a little bit more heavy in their constituents. And so you want to kind of avoid garden soils or compost. I wouldn't grow with either of those, though they're good to add after you have your growth that you are happy with. And so, yes, so the soil and the fertilizer. With the fertilizer, we'll talk about in just a little bit as well. But when you're thinking about fertilizer, I really like to do a lot of DIY. So you can use eggshells and coffee grounds and water and mix those together. And that's a good fertilizer for your plants. Probably after they've developed their cotyledons, so their first 2 sets of leaves, that's when you can start fertilizing them. And then you'll start seeing a heavy onset of growth. Fertilizer, not so much important, but if it's something that you're interested in, that's an option. And so this is an example of just some berry containers with your microgreens in them. You have your beets, you've got radishes. I think one of those is a sunflower over there. And with the microgreens at this point, you could harvest them or let them grow a little bit more. This is another setup that is storage shelf with like little plastic bins. And then this person has it's a 2-part system. So they're growing individual plants up at the top, and then they're putting them together to create a sort of mix, and they just sort of successively grow them, and they have large lights. So this would be a setup that you'd have in like your basement or a designated room. This is more of a intense one. This is a more simple, cutesy one. The key though is drainage. I don't necessarily know if these all have drainage in them, so that's something to consider. But any pot can have drainage. You just gotta drill a hole in it. So over here, we've got that 4-part light system. I really like that one. I've seen it on Amazon. I use it personally. It hooks up in a couple of different ways. You can disconnect them and use them individually. They have a timer on them, which I really like, because another thing you want to keep in mind when you're growing is the length of growth. And again, we'll get into those parts in a second. And then this other one right here, that is like a stand with a more rectangular one right over here. That one it's called Black Magic. And I really like that because it has an adjustable head to it. So you can hang it by itself, take the arms off and hang it. And you can also lift it up and bring it down. And that's really good for as your plants are growing. And it's a full spectrum. It's about $100. Those are the 2 I would recommend if you're going to start out and want to start small. The stand one is not much bigger than this. It's a very tiny, collapsible, and works well. I really like Happy Frog. Fox Farm is a great brand. Their mixes are really healthy and rich in organic matter, which is something you want. And then you have your seed starting trays. So these you can find at garden centers. Maybe you buy some plants already from the spring and you save those containers. That's something that I do is so that I have some seed starting containers. And then you have like a little tray to catch the water at the bottom so that it's not dripping out. And furthermore, that tray can help if you go away for the weekend and you don't have anybody to water your plants. You can just put a layer of water in the bottom of that, and the plants will soak up the water over the time that you're gone. Obviously, you want some seeds, and then you have little tiny tools that are really great for separating and thinning your plants once you've seeded them. You'll probably be seeding about 3 to 4 per cell, and then you'll want to kind of thin those out. So those tools are really good. And then Black Gold is an OMRI product. And so I really like it because it's certified organic and it works well as a fertilizer. Yes. I would say that it's a LED plant grow light. You called it a 4-part light system. 4-part light system. All right. And then just a couple of other things. So there are grow kits out there. There are little aquaponic systems that you can get. There are a lot of them that are relatively inexpensive, 100, 200 bucks. And they can sit on your counter and they have little lights attached to them already. So that's an option. I have this little greenhouse kind of deal. I got it off Amazon for $30, give or take. And that was really nice because that was where I put my seeds when I was starting them. And then I took that and it was a multi-purpose use. So in the spring, I use it to start my seeds for my garden. And then in the winter, I use that to grow my greens in the winter. And it has that little kind of cover and you can remove that cover. And so I think it's very versatile. Up at the top, that's like a Jiffy recyclable, reusable, not reusable, biodegradable container. So you can rip them apart and just plug them into a larger pot. I would use those for transplanting if you were going to do that. And then you got like misters and heating mats and fans. And I think that those are all relatively important if this is a larger scale system that you're going to do. If you're not doing like a whole shelving unit of greens, you probably don't need a fan, but the fan can be helpful to kind of circulate the air so that the plants aren't getting mold or struggling because they're crowded. You know, microgreens in general, they'll grow really close together and that can form mold. So the fans are nice for that. But honestly, bury containers in a windowsill. It's super easy. You don't need to make it as complicated, but this is, it can be exciting. And I think that these are just extra levels that can help you be more successful if this is the route that you want to go. And heating mats, I think, are only really important if you struggle in general with like keeping your temperature regulated in your house. But these are some other examples. That's another system that is probably on the higher end based on the material. And then on the other side, that's just like a really cute, really cool, seamless way to integrate your herbs into the kitchen with the shelving unit there. So I really like that. I think just experiment. My number one thing is to try and experiment. And if you mess up, just take notes and learn from them because there's always something to learn and something that's going to work. So we've talked about materials and we've talked about kind of just what you're going to look in your home for the most ideal situation. And then we are going to talk about the crops themselves. So not everything is set up to be a successful plant to grow indoors. You want to look for crops that are quick yields. So anywhere between 25 and 30 days because you want to use these things pretty regularly. So that's their maturity rate. It's about 25 to 40 days. I personally like to look for local brands and organic brands. That's just my personal preference, non-GMO, and local when you can, because there's a lot of folks out there growing things that we can support. Seed saving is a big thing now. And I think the more that we support these local endeavors, the more rich our neighborhoods and communities will be. And then you can be so frugal that you can use the seeds in your spice rack, you know, and that might be like on the farther end, like if you're desperate and you're like, I really just want to try to see if this mustard seed will grow. But some of those seeds are a lot like the spices are a little bit older, so they might not germinate as well, but it's a cool thing to try out. I've definitely had success, not as great as buying a fresh packet of seeds, but it works. And then transplants. I mean, if you go to the store now, the Home Depot, don't go to Home Depot, actually. I take that back. Whatever garden center, though, you choose to go to, you can get transplants from there. And that's another way to start your microgreen garden. You can just get those little lettuce heads or those kale heads, put them in your containers and grow them indoors that way. And the lettuces and kales and mustard greens, I would consider those cut and grows. And we'll talk about harvesting in a little bit, but that's just removing a couple of leaves and then they keep growing instead of harvesting the whole head. And I have some examples of some local companies. Camp Point Seed Co., American Organic, and Seeds of the Prairie are all local to Illinois. And I really like them because they offer cover crop options, and cover crop options are great because they generally are microgreen. Like the seed composition is usually what people would grow as microgreens anyways. So like a mustard and an alfalfa and an oat straw and things like that. So those are really great options and you're supporting our local community. So More specifically, I think that lettuces, mustard greens, Asian greens, and radishes are going to be your most successful plants to grow as far as greens go. Lettuces are suitable for transplanting, so you can start them off in a seed tray with your individual cells, and then as they grow, you can up pot them into a larger pot and then go into a bigger container like that one setup I showed you a little bit ago. And with lettuces, there's so many different varieties, and that's really fun too. You have your butterheads and your Simpsons and your seeded Simpsons and all different kinds. So I think lettuces are versatile in that regard. And the same goes for mustard greens. They easily grow from seed, they easily grow from transplants. They have a variety of textures and flavors that just make my mouth tingle. There's an Osaka mustard green that's very, very spicy, I really like. And I'm a big fan of the tender purple giants is another one that I really enjoy. With radishes, that's definitely like a microgreen. You're not growing it for the root part of it. You're growing it for the leafy part. So things like Easter eggs is a variety, a cultivar that's good. But you're looking for like the small salad varieties because those are going to mature pretty quickly. You have like a 2-week turnaround with your smaller salad varieties. And then with your Asian greens, there are, again, so many different varieties. You've got pak choy, bok choy, the list goes on, and some of them mature as early as 25 days. So that's another really exciting one to use. And so these would be, if I was to separate growing greens indoors into 2 categories, you have your microgreens and you have your just like leafy greens, your bigger greens. And so these would be your bigger leafy greens that you can grow not till just past their cotyledons. You can grow them all the way until they're full heads. Whereas on this next slide, I'm going to show you some examples of what I would consider microgreens and some options and ideas that you might consider. And the reason why microgreens are so exciting is because they actually, as little tiny babies, pack more nutrients than their mature counterparts, about 4 times more in some varieties. So it's a really big health thing. People really appreciate the health benefits that you can get from that. And so you've got amaranth, broccoli, onions, radishes, mint and fennel and fenugreek are other ones. And like you would harvest them at that very tiny stage, like just as they're sprouting. You can pick a couple of here and there, or you can harvest the whole pack and start again. But those are the differences. The concept, though, those foundations of how you would take care of them are pretty similar. It's just the harvesting that's different. And then these are some seed companies that I use. I definitely really like Renee's Gardens. They also have a great cover crop blend that I've used on more than one occasion. And Seeds of Change is another one. They do a lot of work with seed saving that I think is really important. There's a lot of heirloom varieties that they have that they're saving. And then you have Peaceful Valley is another one, as well as Home Organic Seeds. Those are another good blends. I just am always looking for the USDA organic sign on there to make sure, because I don't want pesticides or anything in my seeds. So now we get into the fun part, because I'm pretty sure all of you already have your containers and your seeds, and you've been working on this stuff already. So this is where those tips and tricks come in, where we're going to start figuring out the nuances of this. So I think that seed starting is the quickest and easiest way to go about growing greens indoors. It's no fuss. But sometimes it's a little bit more patience because sometimes they don't germinate immediately. Maybe that particular variety needs a little bit more heat or a little bit more sun. So seed starting, though, is more cost effective on that other side of it. So it's cost effective, but it tends to be slower, and the germination rates can be low, and sometimes they even can have disease susceptibility. So that's why folks go to the other end of the spectrum and they buy transplants. They'll buy starts because they've already matured to a particular degree, and now you can just reap the benefits of cutting and growing. You cut a few leaves off, make your little salad, and then more leaves grow. So folks do that because you get the quicker harvest and the better yields. But I think that there's the best of both worlds. There's that third way, and that third way is starting some seeds, letting some things transplant, or starting some of those seeds and transplanting them, I think that you can have a new harvest underway if you do seed succession that way. So you start some seeds, you thin them out, you transplant the thinned out ones, and then you start a whole new batch of seeds. That's on a larger scale too, I think. You know, if you're one of those people who's going to use these things on a like pretty consistent basis, you got a family that loves vegetables, this is a good way to do that. So I'm all about the reusing and recycling. And one of the things to consider when you're doing that is that you want to always clean your material. That's the number one thing. Even if you're like, you got a pot from the garden center and it's a new plant, but you want to put it in a beautiful pot that you have, clean that pot out first, because you never know what was in there before, especially if you're reusing it. And there's sometimes bacteria that really damage a new budding baby seedling. So yeah, so soap and water, hot soap and water, little bit of bleach, and you just want to kind of soak that and make sure that there's no remnants of like dirt or anything like that. And I would even do that with like a brand new pot that you just bought that never had anything in it. I would still do that. Yeah. And furthermore, I always clean my plants too, because you never know what might be on those plants, what bugs or diseases might be. So I always give a little spray. I kind of keep them a little isolated for a few days before I integrate them into the house, just in case, because that's the other thing too. Sometimes you fall in love with the plant, but it has a bug issue or something. You can risk the rest of your plants. So I always clean my trays. It's also really good to just already have your space set up. So if you decided that you want to go with a shelving unit and you have your fluorescent lights, have that set up before you start your seeds, because you don't want to have your seeds all started and you got to build everything up. So I like to have that my space set up first, as well as a timer. If you decide that you want to use a timer, you want to keep that timer on for about 14 hours a day. Because that's about the time length that they're going to need to grow pretty quickly. So there are really cost efficient lightings, especially for that 14 hours a day. Especially those LED ones. That Black Magic one that I mentioned is a good one. My bill doesn't go up the roof because of it. Is that a regular light bulb? No, it's a fluorescent. It's a LED. So what about regular light bulb? Yeah. You could totally just use a regular light bulb. What wattage? Well, I think that whatever wattage you already have is supplemental, and I think that it would be fine. Like it's an additional light source, so I don't think that there needs to be a specific wattage. Like with the Black Magic or the LEDs, I think the LED ones, the 4-part system is like a 30 watt. It's the 30 watt purple and blue light, so it's not a huge wattage. So you want to make sure that it's clean, you have your lights on for 14 hours a day, and that they're about 3 to 4 inches above the soil surface. That's the ideal height. And then as your plants grow, you lift the light up so that the plants are not getting burned. And furthermore, you want to kind of keep them not too much farther than that 3 to 4 inches so that they are not reaching and you don't get those stragglers that start getting really tall and then never grow because they've just shot up. And then I know it seems really silly and redundant, but you want to make sure you're reading the instructions on the seed packet, because there might be spacing or depth, and those things are really important. Some seeds are very, very tiny and they don't need to be covered with soil. They just need to lay right on the surface. And other seeds do need to be about 1/2 inch down into the soil. So that part's really important, I think. And a lot of people can sometimes skip that step and just shove a seed into the soil. And sometimes it works. You know, sometimes you still get the germination, but I think if you want to be a little bit more successful, read the package. So when you're planting your seeds, so this whole time I've been talking about cotyledons, that's a cotyledon. It's just the 2 first baby leaves of a plant. So you've prepped your space, you've gotten your light set up, you have your seeds, you know what the depth they need. What you're going to do is you're going to fill your tray with pre-moistened seed starting soil. So you just can get it in a little bucket or a little tray, wet it down. You don't want it sopping wet, like dripping, but when you pick it up, you want to be able to like have it stay in a clump. And then when you squeeze it, you don't want it to be running water. It just is like a nice little clump. And then you fill your seeds, whatever tray you're using, that's what you're going to fill it with. And then you're going to make your little holes to put your seeds in based on whatever depth they are. And then once they develop their cotyledons, you're going to thin them to about 1 plant per cell so that they're not crowding each other. And then you can take those other thinnings, you can either use them as microgreens and put them on your salad or in your smoothie, or you can transplant them and put them into other pots and see if they grow. And then, like I said, you want to adjust the plants as they get taller, adjust the lights as they get taller, and then you want to keep the plants moist. And there's no hard and fast way to say like every 3 days, water these plants. It's really a relationship that you have to have. So you want to be looking at your plants daily and seeing, I like to have a little mister to just give it a little mist. You don't want to drench it on the top so that the leaves are all wet and soaking wet. You want to really get right at the soil level. So there are little misters that have like a W40 or what's it? The WD-40, the little shooter. You can get a little mister like that. So it's very specific. And that's how you're going to plant your seed trays. So this is a step-by-step. You fill your seed tray, you make your little holes, you have your plants are growing, and now you're thinning them out. And so I mentioned succession planting a little bit ago. And succession planting is just when you take one crop and you plant it, and then in a couple of weeks you harvest all that and you plant a different crop in the same potting material that you had before. So you don't need to get new potting material if you're going to do it in a particular, successively. After about like the 3rd or 4th successive planting, you probably are going to want to get rid of that soil, or at least, put it in your garden if you have an outdoor garden, or put it in your other plants. But it probably doesn't have any nutrients left in it to sustain life. So after a couple of successive plantings, you really want to change out your soil, and then repeat the steps of cleaning out your trays, sanitizing them, and then the crop rotation is where you change the entire soil out so that you don't lose the key nutrients. And this is just like, again, for those larger setups, like if you had your shelving unit and you've got your radishes and your alfalfa and your amaranth and your basil, and you're like harvesting it regularly, and you want to keep that soil, you just go through on a larger scale. If you're just growing your little berry container, you would just change that soil out because it's a smaller container. And so then with the harvesting, this is really going to depend on what your ideal growth is. So if you're growing for microgreens, you'll harvest them pretty much at their length of having those 2 baby leaves. But if you want to go with the leafy greens, if you're growing kale or black-seeded Simpsons or something, and you want to let it go to its head, you can either cut the whole head, or you can do a little cut and grow. And I have some demonstration of how you would cut specifically. You can harvest complete trays and then prep the soil, or you can do your individual leaves. But that's really up to you, how you want to go about harvesting your plants. I always use clean shears and clean pruners because especially if you're doing a cut and grow situation, because if you use dirty scissors or dirty shears, you could infect the plant and then bring in all kinds of diseases, and then you lose your nice crops and your nice harvest. So I take that extra step, again, just like soap and water, maybe a little bit of bleach if you want to be extra careful. And you want to cut as low as possible to the base of the plant. So they have here their shears, and they're not ripping it out with the whole plant. So what's going to happen is this will grow a whole new set of plants. So that's the alternative way that you can do it. Or you can just pull the whole thing out with the roots and then just wash the roots off. So with handling and storage, depending on what medium you've grown your greens in, you're gonna wanna wash them. If you're doing microgreens, they'll hold up for about a week in the fridge. You can harvest the whole thing of microgreens, wash the roots off, and then fold them into paper, and then put them into their storage, like with paper towels. Fold them up, put them into a little airtight container, and they'll probably keep about a little bit longer, like 2 weeks maybe, if you go that extra step. But on their own, if you just cut them out. Yeah. You could. So you could snip them off, but if you're snipping off the microgreens, you're not, there's no part of the plant to grow a new leaves because it's too tiny. So you could just cut them off and then throw the rest of it away. Or you could take the roots out, which also have nutrients in them. Take the whole plant out with the roots, which have nutrients in them, and then wash them out that way. It's really a matter of preference. You can go either way. If you cut them, you're just not going to have that little extra nutrients, but you don't have to go that step of washing them. So it's preference really. And then with microgreens, you want to dry them. So I will take like a little fan, lay them out on the paper towel and dry them for about 1 to 2 minutes. So there's not moisture on them, because if you're putting them into their paper towel and then into the fridge, sometimes that moisture can cause mold and bacteria. So we just want to keep that part safe. And I am, as always, a little bit rushing because I get so excited about things. So I'm done. But I think that gives us ample opportunity to dig into some more specifics as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julia, so much. For those of us who are in person, if you do have a question, just raise your hand, because we are going to use the microphone so that our viewers at home can also hear your question. Anybody have one? Okay. Right here.
Hi. My question is about spinach. Spinach seems difficult to do inside. I mean, have you been successful at all with growing spinach inside?
So I think spinach is one of those, it's a cool crop. So that 75-degree ample temperature that I was mentioning is not ideal for spinach. Spinach wants like 65, 55 degrees. So spinach is a really good one that you can just grow like in your basement, or kind of have a fan on it a little bit more. Those are some, troubleshooting that I would do if you're trying to grow spinach. But in general, I think spinach is just a finicky one to grow, even in outdoors. Yes.
I would love to grow scallions and cilantro, but not coriander as a microgreen, but the cilantro plant. Do you do that much?
Yeah, you can definitely grow both of those, and then with the cilantro, you can cut it and it will grow back.
I do outside in the garden, but they cannot last long. With scallions or green onions, that I have done a little bit from the store,
Yeah, and I think so. The scallions with the seeds, if you're, with the greens in that regard, I usually just do the bulb. Like if you wanted to grow it from seed, you could do that, and then once you get some bulbs, like put them in water, because otherwise, I don't see the microgreen version of it being a successful way to like growing them sustainably. I think putting them in the water cup is like a lot easier. Yes. Right. Yeah. Or alternatively, like I said, you could grow it and then harvest it and use that bulb and then just put it in if you want to try out growing scallions and green onions from seed. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a couple questions from online, and if anybody else has questions from online, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A or the chat. So I think you may have answered this a little earlier, but could you explain again what you use to clean or wash and disinfect your seed trays?
Yeah. So you can use any old dish soap that you have, whatever dish soap you use, and then warm water as well as like a cap full of bleach, just for extra measure. I don't use any specific ones. There are like sanitizing sprays that you can get that are for like greenhouses that, you know, they are sold in garden stores, but I don't think that that's necessary. You can just use soap and water.
And as an experiment last year, I snipped a few basil stems and rooted them. They didn't grow very full. However, I had fresh basil all winter. What are your thoughts on snipping more herbs, rooting them in plant, as well as what do you recommend for them to grow fuller?
Yeah. So that's, I showed you that photo earlier of like growing things just in jars. And I think that that's a really easy way to grow greens as well, just in water alone, by cutting your plant, stripping it off a few of the bottom leaves, and then putting in water. Some successful ways to make them bigger or last longer or stay healthier. You can dip them in a rooting hormone that you can get at a garden center. They come in like there's like a powder form and a gel form, and you just dip it in and then put it in the water. Or honey. Honey is a great one to use. You just dip the bottom of the stem into some honey. It has the antimicrobial and antibacterial properties, and then that helps it keep it safe, and then helps it also put out its roots. And then you just kind of continually cut and continually use, and it will keep coming back. So I think that that's an amazing way to bring your garden inside. Some plants are not successful in doing that. So for instance, I wouldn't say that you could cut cilantro just like a stem of cilantro and then root it. It's not one of the ones that could work. But like rosemary, basil, even like tarragon, those are all really great ones that you could cut and root yourself, and then grow in just some water.
How long can you use a greenhouse like the one you have? Do you need a heater because of Chicago winter?
So I will tell you a very probably scary truth is that I lived my first 3 years in Chicago in a house that had no central heating. And we just had a little forced air unit in our kitchen. And my little grow setup was all the way in the front room. So the heater never got back there. And those plants did fine. And I have little temperature gauges in like all the places in the house. And I don't think it ever got below like 45 some days. And they did fine. So I don't think there needs to be, I think you can grow with that setup pretty easily in a variety of conditions because you have that coverage. The little plastic cover is really what's helping keep the heat trapped in there. So
Just one more. Oh, sorry. Does somebody have?
That's definitely not an outdoor setup. I wouldn't use that outdoors. That plastic won't bear well with the sun. It's definitely more of like an indoor setup.
Could you review the suggestions about what kind of lights to use in the wattage?
Yeah, I'll actually just go back to that. So there are a couple of different options. I think before you go out and spend any money, you can always just use a desk lamp or a little light that you already have. I think like 30-watt lights is kind of what the 4-part system is. And the Black Magic one is 100-watt. So the wattage, I think, only matters to the extent of how much you're trying to grow. So if you just have like one little cup of herbs that you're trying to grow, your lamp is going to be enough supplemental lighting. But if you're getting a greenhouse setup and you're trying to go big, I would highly recommend like anywhere between a 75 and 100-watt LED light. So the Black Magic is a really good one. And the combination of the 4 of those, the 4-part system would give you a good bit of light, but it's a 30-watt.
Something that we did mention at the beginning is that this program is being recorded this evening and will be available on YouTube, our YouTube channel in a few days. We will be sending out a link to that, to the video in a few days after it's been edited. So if you're not catching everything right now, you will have the opportunity to watch this again.
Where are some of these seeds and potting soils that you've referenced as your favorites? Are they readily available in most garden centers?
Yeah, I would say Fox Farm is definitely readily available in most garden centers. Renee's Garden Seeds is also readily available in most garden centers. Most of this material you can source from your mom and pop garden centers as well as big box store garden centers. Pretty versatile. Seeds, on the other hand, like I do a lot of ordering online. So Baker Seeds is a great resource. You also have Seed Savers is another one that I really like. And then Renee's Gardens, I highly like Renee's Gardens is my number one. If I was to go with any recommendation that I highly have had great success with, I never had an issue with any germination problems with any of the seed packets, would be Renee's Gardens.
If you're growing plants in jars with water, how often do you change the water?
Yeah, so about every 2 days. Thank you for reminding me. That was one of the big things I wanted to remember when I was talking about that, was that yes. So that's another successful way to keep your plants happy and healthy and vibrant, is changing the water every 2 days. So that water is going to get just not really pretty, and maybe start growing algae and other things if you leave it in, especially a sunny window. So changing that water, keeping that water fresh, going to be your best bet.
How, at what point in the year, what time in the year are you starting to do this indoors?
So you all year round,
You can do it all
grow
year round.
greens indoors all year round. I do my seed starting in about February, March, and then I'll bring things indoors anywhere between now and November. And then I'll kind of grow my winter plants through January. Then I'll start going back outside.
If the place that you're choosing to have like your indoor plants has a heat register underneath it, what does that do?
Yeah, so I think that in theory, it seems like a good idea, but in practice, it actually is can be quite detrimental to plants. That heat is going to be drying to the plants. It's going to breed great opportunities for spider mites and other pests that we don't want. And also just might require you to do more, water more, and take care of your plants more. So I don't recommend putting your plants near any kind of heat or like air conditioning source, because that's going to stress your plants out.
I can talk pretty loud. We can't hear you online. Oh, okay.
So yeah, you talked about, somebody had asked, I don't think you covered this, and then you just referenced when you bring your plants inside from out.
Yeah,
I don't think you've covered how you do that.
sure.
Did you?
So-
I'm sorry if you did.
I did, you're right. I
Okay.
did not cover that, just because oftentimes when folks are growing greens indoors, they're not usually bringing their plants inside, unless they're doing things like making cuttings and propagating their plants and then bringing them inside, in the sense of like growing vegetables, right? Your herbs, probably you're going to bring a couple of your herbs in. So if you have herbs in your pots. And so what I do when I bring anything inside is I keep them isolated. I spray them down and I kind of keep them away from any other plants before I put them into wherever they're going to sit for a while, just to make sure I'm not bringing anything in from outside. So that's a big thing. You always want to do that. That's what I do with any plant, whether I buy it from the store, whether I've been growing it out in the backyard. You just want to isolate and clean, so you protect it. Sure. Yeah. Again, soap and water. Soap and water is really good. You can. Yes. Yep. Just a little bit of soap and water. You can do a neem oil is another one, though with neem oil, you want to really dilute it and not use a lot, because that can actually kind of coat the plant and not be able to let it breathe. But neem oil is a non, it's a pesticide, but it's an organic one that you can use. You can also do things like make a cayenne little spray with water and soap, and that'll get rid of pests. If you have pests that you see on your plants, but you really want to bring them inside, it's another thing you can do to take care of them. There are a lot of different recipes online that you can look for, but you can also buy just like a pesticide spray if you want to clean your plants off. But just like a quick once over with some soap and water is probably going to mitigate most things if you have anything going on with your plants. Yeah. Yes, of course. I appreciate your questions. Thank you for asking for clarification. I would use a spray bottle. I would take the spray bottle. I would mix 1 part soap with 3 parts water, shake it up, spray your plants down, let it sit in the corner for a little bit. And then in about a day or 2, you can put it into a shower or you can put it into your sink and you can rinse it off. And then you can integrate it back into your wherever you're putting it.
Could you talk a little bit about growing seeds or plants in water, like in the Aero Garden?
Yeah, so I am not a super familiar with growing in an Aero Garden. I do know that they have a potting material that's soilless, so that's usually pretty good for transplants. I've never actually grown in an Aero Garden medium, so I can't speak too much on that system, but it's generally like a rocky, gravelly system, and it usually has like a pot that you would grow the plant in. So that's about as much as I can say on that system. I've never grown any seeds in it though.
How do I avoid small flies coming off the potting soil? I had hundreds of them in my indoor plants.
Fungus gnats. Yeah, fungus gnats are a pest in the sense that they're just like a nuisance. They don't actually damage your soil or your plants, but they are indicating something. And what they're indicating is that you're overwatering your plants. If you start seeing little gnats around, they get in your face and they're surrounding all your plants, especially after you water, you see a bunch, you're overwatering your plants. So one thing that you can do is you can reduce your watering, let it sit for a couple of days. There are also like sticky traps that you can get. They're like yellow sticky papers, and you can stick that in your pot and that's going to attract the gnats. The one thing to note about that is if you're seeing hundreds, you might want to check your soil. You just take your plant out of the pot and shake the soil around. If you see like white mold, or if it smells funny, you might want to change the soil out altogether and put clean soil in, because you might have a root disease at that point because you've overwatered. Anything
Anybody
else?
have any other questions? Watching online. I had mine. I've already asked them.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, on your handouts, my email address is on there. I am more than happy to answer further questions, troubleshoot with you. You can send me photos and be like, what's going on here? I'm happy to help in any way possible. And as Sue mentioned, this will be online for you to reference, and you have your handouts as well. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. No, I really don't. I won't regret it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. And have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much.